The camera drifts down through layers of atmosphere, through wisps of cloud that catch the last light of a sun that set hours ago. Below, the curve of Earth rotates slowly in darkness, and at the bottom of the world, a white continent emerges from shadow. This is Antarctica, ringed by dark water that never stops moving, never stops churning with cold currents that circle the pole like a vast, slow river. Tonight, we will visit the penguins, not rushing, not dramatizing, but moving gently from colony to colony as if we had all the time in the world. Because tonight is not about urgency. Tonight is about feathers and ice and the quiet patterns that repeat themselves across thousands of miles of frozen coast. Close your eyes if you want. Listen. Imagine the wind, the snow, the sound of waves breaking against ice that has been there for centuries. A penguin is a bird that gave up the sky. Somewhere in the deep past, their ancestors folded their wings into flippers, traded air for water, and became swimmers instead of flyers. Their bodies are shaped like torpedoes now, dense and streamlined, covered in feathers so tightly packed that water cannot reach the skin beneath. They are seabirds, all of them, tied to the ocean in ways that other birds are not. There are many species scattered across the southern half of the planet, from the coldest ice to temperate beaches where the sun is warm and the wind carries the smell of grass instead of snow, but they all share the same basic design: the upright posture on land, a torpedo dive in water, and a life split between two worlds. Tonight we will meet 5 of them: emperors in the deep winter, Adelies and chinstraps in the brief Antarctic summer, gentoos on beaches where green things grow, rockhoppers on cliffs above a crashing sea. Each one has found its own way of surviving, its own small corner of the vast southern ocean, its own rhythm of breeding and feeding and raising young in places that seem, to human eyes, impossibly harsh. The screen fades to black, then slowly brightens into a landscape of pure cold. This is the Weddell Sea in the middle of winter, when the sun does not rise for months, and the only light comes from stars and the occasional shimmer of aurora across the southern horizon. The sea ice stretches flat and white in every direction, marked only by pressure ridges where plates of ice have collided and buckled upward into frozen walls. The temperature is 60 below zero. The wind is steady, relentless, scraping loose snow across the surface in long, low rivers of white. And standing in the middle of this frozen desert, far from open water, far from any shelter, are the emperor penguins. They're gathered in a huddle, thousands of them, packed so tightly that individual birds are hard to distinguish. From a distance, the huddle looks like a single dark mass, slightly oval, slowly shifting and breathing as birds on the outside work their way toward the centre, and birds in the centre gradually drift back out. Each penguin stands upright, nearly 4 feet tall, with a sleek black back and a white belly marked with pale yellow and orange around the neck and cheeks. They do not move much. They stand, and they wait, and they endure. This is how emperors breed, not in the spring like most birds, but in the coldest, darkest part of the year. The females have already laid their eggs and returned to the sea, leaving the males to incubate them through the winter. Each male balances a single egg on the tops of his feet, tucked under a warm fold of belly skin called a brood pouch. He will stand like this for 2 months without eating, without moving more than a few steps, keeping that egg at precisely the right temperature while the world around him tries to freeze everything solid. The huddle is their survival. Alone, a penguin would lose heat faster than its body could produce it. But together, packed shoulder to shoulder, they create a microclimate, a pocket of warmth in the middle of the ice. The temperature inside the huddle can be 30 or 40 degrees warmer than the air outside. It is not comfortable, but it is survivable. They take turns on the outside where the wind hits hardest. A bird on the edge will lean into the wind, feathers compressed, breath-forming clouds of ice crystals around its head. After a while, the entire huddle shifts, a slow, coordinated shuffle, and the bird that was on the edge finds itself deeper in the pack. Another bird takes its place at the windward side. The cycle repeats, over and over, hour after hour, day after day. There is no sound except the wind and the occasional low call, a long trumpeting note that echoes across the ice. These are contact calls, birds checking in with their neighbours, maintaining the social bond that holds the huddle together. Sometimes a bird will stretch, lifting one flipper and then the other, preening a few feathers, then settling back into position. But mostly they are still. They have turned themselves into a single organism, a living heat engine, using cooperation to create a pocket of survivable space in a place where survival should be impossible. The camera lingers on the huddle as the aurora flickers overhead, green and violet curtains of light rippling silently across the stars. Snow falls, fine and dry, settling on black backs and melting slowly from body heat. The huddle tightens, the wind passes, the huddle shifts a few steps, the wind returns. This is the rhythm of the Emperor Winter. Endure, cooperate, wait. Wait for the females to return from the sea, wait for the eggs to hatch, wait for the sun to come back, wait for the ice to break and the ocean to open again. For now, there is only this: the huddle, the ice, the wind, the stars. The darkness begins to soften, not all at once, but gradually over days and weeks, as the sun climbs back toward the horizon and the long polar night gives way to dawn. The sky brightens from black to deep blue to silver, and the ice begins to glow with reflected light. The calendar has turned. The emperors are still there, still huddling, but their eggs have hatched into small grey chicks that huddle under the brood pouches now, and the females have returned, bellies full of fish, ready to take over feeding duties while the males finally walk back to the sea to hunt. But we are moving now, drifting with the light across hundreds of miles of ice and water to a different kind of colony, a different kind of penguin. The camera follows the retreating ice edge north and east to where the Antarctic peninsula reaches up towards South America like a frozen finger. Here the summer is brief but intense. The ice melts back from rocky islands and exposed headlands, and the ocean fills with krill and fish drawn to the burst of plankton that blooms in the long daylight. This is where the Adelie penguins come to breed. They are smaller than emperors, about 2 feet tall with crisp black and white plumage, and a neat white ring around each eye that gives them a look of permanent surprise. They are bustling, energetic, constantly in motion. The colony is noisy and crowded, spread across a rocky slope that runs from the high ground down to the beach. There are thousands of nests, each one a shallow depression lined with pebbles, each pair of adults taking turns sitting on 2 eggs, while the other partner goes to sea to feed. The Adelies have worn highways into the snow and ice, smooth paths trampled by thousands of webbed feet, walking the same route day after day, from the sea to the nests, from the nests to the sea, back and forth, back and forth. A returning adult waddles up the beach with its belly full, head low, flippers held slightly out for balance. It climbs the slope, stepping carefully over rocks and puddles of meltwater, calling as it approaches its nesting territory. Its mate answers from the nest, standing and stretching, ready to hand over incubation duties. They bow to each other, a quick ritual greeting, and then trade places. The adult that has been sitting for hours or days steps off the nest, stretches its flippers wide and heads down the slope toward the water, ready to dive and feed and return again. The chicks are hatching now, tiny grey bundles of down, still damp from the egg, huddled against a parent's belly for warmth. They are helpless, unable to regulate their own temperature, dependent entirely on the adults for food and protection. The parents take turns brooding and foraging. When an adult returns from the sea, it regurgitates partially digested krill into the chick's mouth, feeding by feel, responding to the chick's begging call and the way it nudges and pushes against the adult's throat. The chick grows quickly, doubling in size every few days, demanding more and more food as its metabolism roars. A short distance away, on higher cliffs that catch the wind and shed snow quickly, the chinstrap penguins have their own colony. They look similar to Adelie's, but with a distinctive black line running under the chin like a helmet strap. They nest on narrow ledges and steep slopes where the footing is treacherous and the wind is constant. They climb with a combination of hopping, scrambling and sheer determination, using their flippers for balance and their stiff tails as props. It looks awkward, almost comical, but they are perfectly adapted to this terrain. The steep cliffs keep them safe from some predators and give them a clear view of the ocean below, where they will spend most of their lives once the breeding season ends. Both species follow the same basic pattern. Arrive in early spring when the ice is still thick. Claim a nest site, often the same one used in previous years. Court, mate, lay eggs. Incubate for about a month, trading shifts so each adult gets time to feed. Hatch the chicks and feed them constantly through the short summer. Watch the chicks grow and form creches. Large groups of young birds huddled together for warmth while both parents go to sea to gather enough food to keep up with demand. Then, as the summer fades and the ice begins to return, the chicks fledge, trading their grey down for waterproof feathers, and head to sea for the first time. The adults molt, coming ashore to replace their entire plumage in one exhausting process that leaves them flightless and vulnerable for a few weeks. And then, when the new feathers have grown in, they return to the ocean, scattering across the feeding grounds, becoming solitary swimmers in vast waters until the next spring calls them back to the same beaches, the same cliffs, the same nest sites. The camera lingers on the colony as the light shifts. Chicks begging, adults calling, waves breaking on the beach. A skua flies overhead, a large brown gull-like bird, scanning for unguarded eggs or the weak chicks. The penguins ignore it unless it gets too close. Then they lunge and snap, driving it away with sharp bills and angry vocalizations. Life is busy here, dense and loud and full of small dramas, but the overall tone remains calm. This is simply what happens every summer. This is the rhythm: lay, incubate, feed, grow, molt, return. The same cycle repeated by millions of birds across dozens of colonies scattered along the Antarctic coast. Now we travel north, following the cold currents up into the subantarctic, to islands that lie between the ice and the temperate zones. The air is warmer here, the summers longer, and some of the slopes are covered in tussock grass instead of snow. This is the realm of the gentoo penguin, a larger species with a bright orange bill and a white patch that sweeps back across the top of the head like a bonnet. They are elegant in the water, fast and agile, and slightly clumsy on land, waddling with a rolling gait that somehow conveys both effort and grace. The colony is spread across a beach and the low hills behind it. The nests are mounds of pebbles and vegetation, each pair carefully arranged and defended. Gentoos are particular about their nests. They steal pebbles from each other when the opportunity arises, carrying them one at a time in their bills, adding them to the pile, rearranging them just so. A bird will stand at its nest and survey the surrounding area, then dart over to a neighbour's nest, snatch a pebble, and hurry back before the neighbour can react. Sometimes they get caught. A brief scuffle, a lot of noise, and then everything settles back to normal. The pebbles matter. A well-built nest keeps the eggs off the cold, wet ground and helps with drainage during rain. The beach is alive with activity. Adults returning from the sea burst out of the waves, shaking water from their feathers, and hurry up the beach toward their nests. Others are heading down, running with a low posture, flippers tight against their bodies, building speed until they hit the water and dive cleanly under the first wave. They are fast swimmers, capable of reaching speeds that would be impressive for a fish. Underwater they fly, using their flippers as wings and their feet as rudders, twisting and turning with precision, pursuing small fish through the kelp forests and open water just offshore. The camera follows one bird as it dives. The surface light fades quickly, turning green and dim. The penguin strokes downward with powerful wing beats, each stroke propelling it forward in a smooth glide. Schools of fish scatter as it approaches, flashing silver in the murky light. The penguin adjusts its trajectory, angles upward, and snaps a fish out of the water column with a quick sideways strike. It swallows the fish whole and continues hunting, diving deeper, moving through the water with an ease and confidence that is completely absent on land. This is its element. This is where penguins make their living, in the cold, dim waters of the Southern Ocean, chasing prey that moves fast and hides well. After several minutes, the bird surfaces, takes a breath, and dives again, and again. Each dive lasts a minute or two, followed by a few seconds at the surface to breathe and orient. The cycle repeats until the bird's stomach is full, and then it turns back towards shore, swimming fast just below the surface, following the slope of the seafloor and the sound of waves breaking on rock. Back on land, the chicks are growing. Gentoo chicks are covered in grey-brown down, round and fluffy, with oversized feet and a constant hunger. They follow their parents around the nest area, begging with high-pitched calls and jabbing at the adult's bill. The adult responds by bending down and regurgitating a slurry of partially digested fish. The chick eats eagerly, sometimes shoving its entire head into the adult's mouth, trying to get every last bit. When the meal is done, the chick settles down, preens a few feathers, and waits for the next feeding. The adults come and go, trading shifts, bringing food, maintaining the nest, always busy. The wind picks up. Clouds roll in from the west, low and grey, trailing curtains of rain. The penguins do not seem to mind. They are waterproof, after all, built to spend their lives in and around water. The rain beads up on their feathers and rolls off. They shake occasionally, sending a spray of droplets into the air, and continue with their routines. Nest building, feeding, preening, sleeping, standing up with their heads tucked under a flipper. The rhythm continues regardless of weather. Higher up the coast, on cliffs that rise straight out of the ocean, the rockhopper penguins have made their home. They are smaller than gentoos, about 2 feet tall, with spiky yellow and black crests that stick up from their heads like wild eyebrows. They are named for the way they move on land, hopping from rock to rock with both feet together, using their powerful legs and stiff tails to navigate terrain that seems impossible for a bird. They live in places where waves crash directly against the cliffs, where landing means timing your exit from the water perfectly to avoid being smashed against the rocks. The camera watches as a group of rockhoppers approaches the shore. They swim just below the surface, riding the swells, waiting for the right moment. A large wave builds, lifting them up, and they surge forward with it, popping out of the water onto a slick, algae-covered rock just as the wave breaks around them. They land awkwardly, flippers out for balance, and immediately start hopping upward, away from the next wave. Hop, hop, hop. They bounce up a series of rocky steps, sometimes slipping, sometimes scrambling with both flippers and feet, always moving upward. It takes several minutes to climb 50 feet. They do it multiple times a day, every day, throughout the breeding season. The colony is loud and crowded, packed onto narrow ledges and small patches of flat ground between boulders. The nests are simple scrapes, barely more than a depression with a few pebbles, but each one is fiercely defended. Rockhoppers are aggressive, quick to lunge and jab at neighbours who get too close. They argue constantly, a cacophony of braying calls that echo off the cliffs and mix with the sound of waves and wind. Despite the chaos, they are successful. The cliffs protect them from most land predators, and the rich feeding grounds offshore provide plenty of food. Rockhoppers dive deep, sometimes descending more than 300 feet in search of krill, squid, and small fish. They hunt in areas where strong currents upwell from the ocean floor, bringing nutrients and prey to the surface. They travel far from the colony, sometimes covering dozens of miles in a single foraging trip, following invisible highways of current and temperature that lead them to the best fishing spots. The chicks hatch small and vulnerable, just like all penguin chicks, covered in brown-grey down that does nothing to repel water. They stay close to the adults, sheltering under their bodies, waiting to be fed. The adults return from the sea with crops full of krill, glowing pink-orange from the shrimp-like crustaceans they have swallowed whole. They regurgitate this bounty into the chicks' mouths, and the chicks grow quickly, adding weight and size every day. In a few weeks they will be nearly as large as the adults, still covered in down but strong enough to stand on their own, forming small groups with other chicks, while both parents go to sea at the same time to maximise feeding efficiency. The documentary takes us underwater again, this time in deeper, darker water far from shore. This is the open ocean, the territory that belongs to all penguins but is seen by few humans. The camera drifts through blue-green twilight, following a single bird as it hunts. The penguin strokes steadily downward, past 50 feet, past 100, into a zone where the light is faint and diffuse. Its eyes adjust, pupils wide, capturing every photon. It sees movement, a flicker in the gloom, and accelerates toward it. A school of small fish scatters, and the penguin follows, twisting left and right, snapping its bill, catching one fish then another. Its body is a hunting machine, dense bones that reduce buoyancy, making it easier to dive deep. Powerful pectoral muscles that drive the flippers in rapid strokes, a layer of fat that insulates against the cold and provides energy for long periods without food. Penguins can stay underwater for minutes at a time, holding their breath while they hunt, conserving oxygen by slowing their heart rate and shunting blood away from non-essential organs. They store oxygen in their blood and muscles more efficiently than most birds, allowing them to dive deeper and stay down longer than seems possible for an air-breathing animal. They navigate by memory and by sensing subtle changes in light, current, and the Earth's magnetic field. They know where they are even in featureless water, and they know how to get back to the colony when their hunting is done. The bird surfaces, breathes and dives again. Dive, glide, turn, rise, breathe. The rhythm is hypnotic, repeated over and over as the bird fills its stomach. Finally, with its crop full and its belly heavy, it turns towards shore. It swims steadily, rising toward the surface, breaking through into air and light, and begins the journey back to the colony, back to the nest, back to the chick that is waiting and hungry. Above water, the focus shifts to the life cycle, the endless repeating pattern that defines penguin existence. Eggs are laid, usually 2 per nest for most species, though emperors lay only 1 and take turns in a different way, passing the egg between male and female as the seasons change. The eggs are incubated for weeks, kept warm by contact with the parent's brood patch, a section of belly skin rich with blood vessels. The parents take turns, one sitting while the other feeds, switching off every few days or every few weeks depending on the species and the distance to good feeding grounds. When the chicks hatch, they are helpless, tiny, covered in down that provides some insulation but no waterproofing. They cannot survive on their own. They depend entirely on their parents for warmth, for protection, for food. The adults feed them by regurgitation, bringing up partially digested fish, krill or squid from deep in their stomachs. The chicks beg with open mouths and persistent calls, and the adults respond, bending down, opening their bills, letting the food flow out. It is not graceful, but it works. The chicks grow quickly, doubling and tripling in size, their metabolisms racing to build the body mass they will need to survive their first winter at sea. As the chicks grow, they begin to gather in groups called creches, especially in larger colonies where density is high and predators are a constant threat. The creche is a defensive formation, a huddle of chicks packed together for warmth and safety while both parents go out to feed at the same time. The chicks stay close, moving as a group, watching for predators like skuas, gulls or giant petrels that might swoop down and try to snatch a straggler. The adults return from the sea and find their own chicks within the creche by voice and by scent, calling out and listening for the response, following the sound until they reconnect. It seems impossible, picking out one voice among hundreds, but it works. Parent and chick recognize each other and the feeding continues. The camera pulls back, showing the colony from above. Hundreds, thousands of birds, each one engaged in the same basic tasks. Defending a nest, feeding a chick, returning from the sea, walking to the water. The colony is a living system, dense and complex, but governed by simple rules. Cooperate where cooperation helps. Defend where defense is necessary. Feed your offspring. Survive long enough to breed again next year. The view expands further, pulling back from the single colony to show the entire coastline, then the entire continent, then the ocean surrounding it. Antarctica, the Falklands, South Georgia, Heard Island, Macquarie Island, the coasts of South America, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. Penguin colonies are scattered across all of these places, from the high Antarctic to temperate beaches, each species adapted to its particular niche, and connecting them all, invisible but powerful, are the ocean currents. The Antarctic Circumpolar Current is the largest current on Earth, a river of cold water that flows eastward around the continent, driven by wind and the rotation of the planet. It connects the Atlantic, Pacific and Indian Oceans, mixing water masses, transporting nutrients, creating upwelling zones where deep water rises to the surface and blooms with life. This current is a highway for penguins. They follow it, riding the cold water to feeding grounds hundreds or thousands of miles from their breeding colonies. Different species use different parts of the current, feeding at different depths, targeting different prey, but they are all tied to the same system. Emperors hunt along the edge of the sea ice, diving deep beneath the frozen surface to catch fish and squid. Adelies and chinstraps stay closer to the coast, feeding in the krill swarms that gather near the ice edge in summer. Gentoos hunt in shallower water, often near kelp forests and rocky reefs. Rockhoppers venture into the open ocean, diving deep in search of squid and lanternfish. Each species has its own strategy, its own set of adaptations, but they are all part of the same web, all dependent on the productivity of the cold southern waters. The seasons turn. Spring brings the penguins to shore, gathering at colonies to breed. Summer is a frenzy of feeding and chick rearing, the adults making countless trips from sea to shore and back, pushing themselves to the edge of exhaustion to keep their offspring alive. Fall brings the fledging of the chicks, the end of the breeding season, and the beginning of the molt. Molting is a vulnerable time. Penguins come ashore and stand still for 2 or 3 weeks, while every feather on their body falls out and is replaced. They cannot swim during this time, cannot feed, and must rely entirely on the fat reserves they built up before coming ashore. They stand in loose groups, looking ragged and miserable, feathers falling like snow around them, new feathers growing in beneath. When the molt is complete and the new plumage is waterproof, they return to the sea, leaving the colonies empty and quiet. Winter is spent at sea, often far from land. The birds disperse, travelling alone or in small groups, following the currents and the prey, diving and feeding and resting on the water. They are harder to study during this time, harder to track, but satellite tags and time depth recorders have revealed some of their secrets. They dive thousands of times, covering hundreds of miles, staying at sea for months without ever touching land. This is the hidden part of the penguin year, the time when they are just small shapes in vast waters, anonymous and free. The documentary touches briefly on change. The ocean is warming, though not uniformly. In some areas, the sea ice is retreating, changing the timing of the seasons and the distribution of prey. In other areas, the ice is more variable, breaking up earlier some years, staying late in others. Scientists monitor the colonies, counting nests, banding birds, measuring breeding success. Penguins are sensitive indicators of ocean health, responding quickly to changes in food availability, water temperature, and ice cover. When the krill populations shift, the penguins notice. When the sea ice forms late, the emperors notice. When storms become more frequent, the colonies notice. But the tone remains calm, observational. These are changes happening on a timescale longer than a single season, longer than a single penguin lifetime. The birds respond as they have always responded, by adapting where they can, by moving to new areas, by adjusting their timing. Some colonies shrink, others grow. The overall population fluctuates, but the penguins remain. They have survived ice ages and warm periods, rising seas and falling seas, changes in predator populations and prey distributions. They are resilient, shaped by millions of years of evolution in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. Researchers continue their work, travelling to remote colonies, enduring the same cold and wind that the penguins endure, recording data, taking photographs, collecting samples. They work quietly, trying not to disturb, trying to understand. The goal is not to control or to fix, but simply to witness, to document, to learn. And in learning, to perhaps find ways to protect, to preserve, to ensure that these birds and the ocean they depend on remain healthy and wild. The documentary returns to the ice one last time. Night has fallen again, a clear, calm night under a sky full of stars. The Milky Way arches overhead, bright and dense, its light reflecting faintly on the snow and ice. Open leads of water between the ice floes are perfectly still, mirroring the stars, creating the illusion that the penguins are standing between two skies. The emperors are huddling again, a slow, patient mass of birds enduring another night, another week, another month of winter. The Adelies are asleep on their nests, heads tucked under flippers, conserving heat through the cold hours. The chinstraps are perched on their cliffs, motionless, waiting for dawn. The gentoos are scattered across their beach, resting between foraging trips. The rockhoppers are packed onto their ledges, braced against the wind that never stops blowing. The narrator's voice softens, becomes almost a whisper. Wherever they live, from the coldest ice to temperate coasts, penguins share the same pattern. Gather, breed, dive, feed, raise young, molt, return to the sea. It is a cycle as old as the species, repeated year after year, generation after generation. It is not easy. It is not safe, but it works. The penguins endure, they adapt, they survive. The camera lifts slowly, rising above the colony, above the ice, above the clouds. The colonies shrink to small dark dots on a white landscape, then disappear entirely as the view expands to show the curve of the earth, the swirl of clouds, the dark ocean, the bright ice. The narrator reminds us that as we sleep, the world's penguins will continue their quiet march through snow, sea, and starlight. They will huddle against the cold, They will dive into dark water. They will return to shore with food for their young. They will preen their feathers and call to their mates and stand watch over their nests. They will live the way they have always lived, in rhythm with the ocean and the seasons, part of a pattern larger and older than any individual bird. The sound of waves fades, the wind quiets, the screen darkens, and the story ends as it began with the slow rotation of the earth, the cold southern ocean, and the birds that have made it their home. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. Lie down now and let your breathing slow. Close your eyes and picture Earth from far away, a sphere of blue and white turning slowly in the darkness of space, small enough to hold in your mind but vast enough to contain oceans, mountains, and every life that has ever stirred on its surface. Tonight, we're not here to speak of disaster or fear. We're here to listen to something quieter, something that unfolds over centuries rather than seconds. We're here to understand how the planet breathes. Earth is not still, it never has been. Beneath the oceans and continents, beneath the forests and cities and farmland, the ground itself is moving, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but moving nonetheless. The largest earthquakes in history, the ones that shifted coastlines and changed the shape of the seafloor, are not anomalies or accidents. They are moments when the planet takes a deep, shuddering breath after holding it for decades or centuries. They are adjustments, realignments, the inevitable result of forces that have been building in silence since long before any of us were born. We will drift tonight across the globe, visiting a few of these places where Earth has breathed most deeply. We'll trace coastlines and trenches, mountains and ocean floors. We'll move slowly because that's the only way to understand what's happening. These are not stories of sudden violence but of patience, of rock bending for generations, of shorelines tilting inch by inch, of tension accumulating in the dark until the moment when it can no longer hold. And then, in a span of minutes, sometimes seconds, everything that has been building releases and the world adjusts itself once more. The planet's outer shell is not a single solid piece. Instead, it's broken into enormous sections called tectonic plates, vast rafts of rock, some carrying continents, others supporting ocean basins, all floating on deeper layers that are hotter and softer, flowing in currents too slow to see but powerful enough to move mountains. These plates drift across the surface like slow boats on a thick sea. Where they meet, remarkable things happen. Some slide past each other, grinding edges in long, creaking faults. Others collide head-on, crumpling and thickening into mountain ranges that rise centimetre by centimetre each year. And in other places, one plate dives beneath another, sinking into the hot interior of the planet in a process called subduction. It's at these subduction zones where the largest earthquakes occur. Imagine two enormous plates meeting at an angle, one sliding beneath the other and descending into the heat below. The top plate should be sliding smoothly over the descending one, accommodating the motion without resistance. But that's not what happens. Instead, the plates lock together. Their rough edges catch and hold, like two pieces of wood pressed together with just enough friction to keep them from moving. Meanwhile, deeper down, the descending plate keeps pushing forward, dragging the edge of the upper plate downward, bending it, warping it, storing energy in the deformation like a slowly bent wooden ruler or a rubber band stretched tighter and tighter. This can go on for decades, for centuries. On the surface, nothing seems amiss. The sun rises and sets, tides come and go, people build homes, plant crops, watch their children grow. But deep below, in the darkness of the crust, stress accumulates. The bent edge of the plate pulls downward, and the land above it may tilt slightly, so gradually that no one notices. Shorelines may sink a few centimetres over a generation. Mountains may rise a little faster on the other side of the boundary. All of this happens in silence, invisible unless you're measuring carefully with instruments. And then, one day, the lock breaks. The friction that has held the plates together for so long suddenly fails. The bent plate springs back toward its original position, surging upward and seaward in a motion that might cover meters in just a minute or two. This is an earthquake, the sudden release of all that stored energy, all that slow, invisible bending finally letting go. Let's drift now down to the west coast of South America, to a place where one of the greatest of these releases occurred. Picture the coastline of Chile at twilight, long beaches stretching for hundreds of kilometres, cold Pacific fog rolling in over the water, and behind it all, the Andes Mountains rising like a massive wall, their peaks catching the last light of the sun. This is a land shaped by collision. Just offshore, hidden beneath the ocean, lies the Peru-Chile Trench, one of the deepest gouges in the seafloor. Here, the Nazca Plate, a section of oceanic crust beneath the eastern Pacific, is diving beneath the South American plate, descending into the mantle at a rate of about 7 centimetres per year, roughly as fast as a fingernail grows. For centuries before 1960, this boundary had been locked. The Nazca Plate continued to push forward, but its upper edge was stuck against the base of South America, dragging the continent's edge downward, bending it, loading it with strain. Inland, the Andes continued their slow rise, pushed upward by the collision. Beaches along the coast may have been sinking slightly, so gradually that no one would have noticed without precise measurements. The land was being deformed, warped over a vast area, all in preparation for a moment that no one could predict. In May of 1960, the lock finally broke. Along a stretch of coastline more than 800 kilometres long, a distance greater than from San Francisco to Los Angeles, the boundary between the plates suddenly gave way. The bent edge of South America sprang upward and westward, releasing in mere minutes the strain that had accumulated over centuries. The magnitude was recorded as 9.5, the largest instrumentally measured earthquake in human history. But we're not here to recount the chaos that followed. We're here to understand the motion itself, the way the continent lurched seaward, the way the seafloor rose, the way the shape of the coastline changed in an instant. After the shaking stopped, after the ocean had settled and the aftershocks had faded, the land was different. Some areas had risen by meters, others had sunk. The coastline had a new configuration, and deep below, the plates had found a new temporary equilibrium. The Nazca Plate continues to dive beneath South America even now, and somewhere along that boundary, new sections are locking, bending, storing energy for the next great release, decades or centuries from now. The Andes continue to rise, the trench continues to deepen, Earth continues its slow work of reshaping itself. Now we drift northward, following the rim of the Pacific Ocean, that vast ring where so many plates converge and dive. We arrive at the coast of Alaska on a winter evening, steep forested hills rising straight from the water, fjords cutting deep into the land, icy peaks glowing faintly in the long twilight. This is the edge of North America, but it's also the edge of a plate boundary. Here, the Pacific Plate is sliding beneath the North American Plate along the Aleutian subduction zone, a curving arc of trenches and islands stretching from the Alaska Peninsula out toward Russia. For decades before 1964, the same process was unfolding here as in Chile. The descending Pacific Plate was locked against the base of North America, dragging parts of the Alaskan coast downward. Some shorelines tilted almost imperceptibly. Small islands and coastal marshes slowly sank. Trees that once stood well above high tide found their roots increasingly flooded. All of this happened quietly, with no earthquakes, no warnings, just the slow, steady bending of the crust under invisible stress. On a Friday afternoon in March of 1964, the boundary slipped. Along a stretch of more than 600 kilometres, from Prince William Sound down to the Kodiak Islands, the plates suddenly released. The magnitude was 9.2, the second largest earthquake ever recorded. The bent portion of the crust sprang back upward and seaward. In some places, the land rose by more than 10 metres, 30 feet almost instantly. In other areas, the land dropped by a metre or two. The seafloor shifted. Islands changed shape. Coastlines that had been slowly sinking for generations were suddenly thrust high above the waves. What's remarkable, if you step back and look at the aftermath with patience, is not the destruction, but the transformation. Imagine walking along a beach after the earthquake and finding barnacles and mussels clinging to rocks 10 metres above the waterline, suddenly stranded in air, dying in the sun because the land beneath them had lifted so quickly. Imagine marshes that had been dry land now flooded because the ground had dropped and the tide now reached farther inland. The earthquake was not an event separate from the land. It was the land itself adjusting, finding a new shape, releasing the bend that had been imposed on it by the relentless push of the Pacific Plate. And just as in Chile the process continues, the Pacific Plate is still diving beneath Alaska, still moving forward a few centimetres each year. New sections of the boundary are now locked, bending, accumulating strain. The mountains of the Alaska Range continue to rise. The fjords continue to deepen. Glaciers carve the peaks. Rivers carry sediment to the sea, and beneath it all the crust is slowly preparing for its next breath. We cross the Pacific now, drifting over vast stretches of open water, above undersea mountain ranges and trenches deeper than any canyon on land. We arrive at the warm tropical waters off the coast of Sumatra, where the air is humid and the ocean a deep, saturated blue. Palm trees line the coasts of islands scattered across the sea. Coral reefs glow in the shallows. It feels peaceful, timeless, a place where the rhythms of life are governed by monsoons and tides rather than the grinding of rock miles below. But beneath this calm surface, another plate boundary runs parallel to the coast. The Indian-Australian Plate, a massive section of crust carrying much of the Indian Ocean, is sliding northeastward and diving beneath the Sunda Plate, which supports Sumatra, Java, and much of Southeast Asia. The boundary between them is marked by a deep trench running for thousands of kilometres along the ocean floor. Here, as in Chile and Alaska, the descending plate has been pushing forward steadily, while parts of its upper edge have been locked against the base of the Sunda Plate. For centuries before December 2004, this lock held. The Indian-Australian Plate continued to advance, dragging the edge of the Sunda Plate downward, bending it, tilting the seafloor. GPS stations on islands near the coast, if they had existed a century earlier, would have recorded slow, steady motion, millimetres per year, hardly noticeable, but accumulating. The land was being warped, the seafloor was being bent downward, and deep in the rock, stress was building. On the morning after Christmas in 2004, the lock broke. Along a section of the plate boundary stretching more than 1,200 kilometres, longer than California, the plate suddenly slipped. The bent portion of the Sunda Plate surged upward and westward, the seafloor rising by several metres in some places. The magnitude was somewhere between 9.1 and 9.3, one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded. The motion was so vast, the energy so immense, that it shifted the entire island of Sumatra several metres to the southwest and changed the rotation speed of the Earth by a tiny, measurable amount. But again, we're not here to focus on the chaos. We're here to watch the planet adjust. The rising seafloor displaced an enormous volume of water, sending waves radiating outward in all directions. After the waves had passed and the water returned to calm, the shape of the ocean floor had changed. The coastline had a new configuration. Coral reefs that had been submerged were now closer to the surface. Islands had shifted slightly. And deep below, the plate boundary had found a new temporary position. The stress released, the bending undone, for now. The Indian-Australian Plate continues to move northeast. The Sunda Plate continues to ride over it. New sections of the boundary are locking, new bends are forming, and in a century or two or three another section will slip, and the Earth will breathe again. We drift northeast now, along the curve of the Asian margin, past the Philippines and Taiwan, arriving at the islands of Japan. Here, mountains rise steeply from the sea, forests cover the slopes, rivers carve valleys through volcanic rock, and the coastline is intricate, folded into countless bays and headlands. Japan is a place built by plate tectonics, a chain of islands formed where the Pacific Plate dives beneath the plate supporting Eastern Asia. The boundary between them is marked by the Japan Trench, a deep undersea chasm running parallel to the coast. For decades before March 2011, scientists in Japan had been watching this boundary carefully. They installed GPS stations, seismometers, tide gauges, and instruments on the seafloor to measure even the tiniest motions. They knew the Pacific Plate was descending beneath Japan at a rate of about 8 centimetres per year. They knew that parts of the boundary had locked, that the edge of the overlying plate was being dragged down, bending, tilting, accumulating strain. They could see it in the data. Year after year, GPS stations on the coast moved slightly westward and downward, millimetres at a time, recording the slow deformation of the land. In the early afternoon of March 11, 2011, the lock broke. Along a segment of the trench stretching more than 400 kilometres, the plate slipped. The bent portion of the overlying plate lurched upward and eastward toward the ocean. The magnitude was 9.1. The seafloor rose by metres. The coastline moved several metres seaward in a matter of minutes. Instruments recorded the motion with extraordinary precision. GPS stations that had been creeping westward for decades suddenly jumped eastward. Tide gauges recorded the change in sea level. Seismometers captured the seismic waves radiating outward through the crust. What's remarkable about Japan in 2011 is not just the earthquake itself, but the fact that scientists could measure it so precisely. They could see, in real time and in the data afterward, exactly how much the crust had moved, how much stress had been released, how much bending had been undone. They could map the shape of the slip on the fault and estimate how much strain still remained in nearby sections. They could, in a sense, watch the planet breathe and record every detail of that breath. And as in every other place we've visited, the process continues. The Pacific Plate is still diving beneath Japan. New sections of the boundary are locking. The mountains of the Japanese Alps continue to rise. Volcanoes continue to simmer, fed by the melting of the descending plate deep below. The coastline continues to evolve, shaped by the slow, relentless motion of the crust. Step back now and look at the pattern. Chile, Alaska, Sumatra, Japan. These are all places where one plate dives beneath another along a long curving trench. These are subduction zones, the places where Earth's largest earthquakes occur. Why here and not elsewhere? The answer lies in geometry and scale. Giant earthquakes need large areas where the crust can lock and bend over long distances. They need plate boundaries that extend for hundreds or thousands of kilometres. They need plates that are big enough, strong enough, and moving fast enough to accumulate enormous amounts of strain over centuries. This is why the largest earthquakes tend to cluster around the edges of the Pacific Ocean, forming what's sometimes called the Ring of Fire, a long curving chain of trenches, volcanoes and mountain ranges where plates converge and collide. It's also why you don't see magnitude 9 earthquakes along boundaries where plates slide past each other horizontally, like the San Andreas Fault in California. Those boundaries can produce damaging earthquakes, but they don't have the same geometry, the same ability to lock over vast areas and accumulate strain over huge sections of crust. The process is remarkably slow. Each year, plates move only as far as fingernails grow, a few centimetres at most. But over a century, that's several metres. Over 5 centuries, it's tens of metres. If a boundary remains locked for that long, the accumulated strain is immense. When it finally releases, the motion is correspondingly large, and the energy radiated as seismic waves is enough to be felt across entire continents. But because the process is slow, scientists can identify which zones are most likely to produce giant earthquakes. They can measure how fast plates are moving, which sections of boundaries have slipped recently, and which have been locked for a long time. They can estimate with varying degrees of confidence how much strain has accumulated and how much motion might occur when the lock finally breaks. They can't predict the exact day or hour, but they can say with some certainty that certain stretches of coastline are due for a major adjustment. This is not a cause for fear, but for understanding. Earth is not attacking us. It is simply doing what it has always done, moving, adjusting, redistributing stress, reshaping its surface. The plates have been moving for billions of years, long before there were humans to notice. They will continue moving long after we're gone. Our task is not to stop them, we can't, but to learn to live with them, to understand their rhythms, to build in ways that acknowledge the reality of a planet that is never truly still. We have tools, now that our ancestors could not have imagined. Across the planet, thousands of seismometers listen constantly to the faint vibrations of the crust. Satellites orbit overhead, measuring the shape of the land with such precision that they can detect changes of a few millimeters. GPS stations track the slow drift of continents and the bending of coastlines. Ocean floor instruments measure pressure changes that hint at vertical motion of the seafloor. Together, these instruments form a kind of stethoscope pressed against the surface of the planet, listening to its heartbeat. And there is a heartbeat. Even when the ground feels perfectly still beneath your feet, it is alive with tiny tremors, microquakes, too small for people to feel but detectable by sensitive instruments. These tremors constantly ripple through the crust, marking the places where plates are moving, where faults are creeping, where stress is being released a little bit at a time. Scientists use these signals to map plate boundaries in extraordinary detail, to identify which segments have slipped recently and which are still locked, to estimate where the next major earthquake might occur. The goal is not to generate fear, but to generate preparedness. By understanding where and how large earthquakes are likely to happen, communities can build stronger structures, develop better warning systems, and plan for the adjustments that the planet will inevitably make. In Japan, for instance, buildings are designed to sway and flex during earthquakes, absorbing energy rather than resisting it. Early warning systems detect the first faint seismic waves from a distant earthquake and send alerts to cities farther away, giving people seconds or even minutes to take cover before the strongest shaking arrives. Coastal communities practice evacuation drills, rehearsing what to do if the ground starts moving and the ocean begins to pull back from the shore. None of this eliminates risk, but it reduces it. It transforms the relationship between people and the planet from one of helpless fear to one of informed respect. We are learning to listen to Earth's breathing, to recognize the signs of stress building in the crust, to understand that the ground beneath us is part of a much larger, much slower process. Zoom out once more and see the whole Earth turning slowly in space. Trace the mountain chains that mark ancient collisions, the Himalayas, where India is still pushing into Asia, the Alps, where Africa is colliding with Europe, the Andes, where the ocean floor dives beneath a continent. See the deep trenches that mark subduction zones, the Peru-Chile Trench, the Aleutian Trench, the Java Trench, the Japan Trench, the Mariana Trench. Deeper than Mount Everest is tall. See the wide ocean basins slowly changing shape as new crust forms at mid-ocean ridges, and old crust sinks back into the mantle at trenches. Without these motions, Earth would be a very different place. There would be no high mountain, ranges to catch moisture from the air and create rivers. There would be no volcanic islands rising from the sea, no fertile soils formed from weathered volcanic rock. The oceans would be shallow and stagnant, the continents flat and eroded. The slow churn of plate tectonics is what keeps the planet dynamic, what recycles rock and water and carbon, what creates the varied landscapes we know and love. Millions of people live along these active coastlines, in the shadow of these mountains, on the shores of these trenches. They accept the trade-off: rich fishing waters, mild climates shaped by ocean currents, dramatic scenery, access to geothermal energy, fertile soils, all in regions where the ground occasionally moves. It's a relationship, an accommodation, a recognition that we live on a planet that is not finished, that is still being shaped, still breathing. Think now about time itself, about the way we measure our lives in years and decades while the planet measures its life in millions and billions of years. A human lifetime is barely a flicker in geological time. The mountains we see as permanent, eternal, are actually young and growing. The Himalayas, the tallest range on Earth, began forming only about 50 million years ago when India collided with Asia, recent in planetary terms. They're still rising today, lifted by the same collision that created them, growing taller even as erosion wears them down. The balance between uplift and erosion determines their height, and that balance shifts over time, responding to changes in climate, in the angle of collision, in the speed at which the plates converge. The trenches too are temporary features, though they seem permanent to us. The Peru-Chile Trench has existed for tens of millions of years, but it has not always been in the same place, not always the same depth. As plates shift and boundaries migrate, trenches move, deepen, fill with sediment, and sometimes disappear entirely when the geometry of plate motion changes. The Pacific Ocean itself is slowly shrinking as its edges are consumed at subduction zones, while the Atlantic Ocean grows wider as new crust forms along the mid-Atlantic ridge. In 100 million years, the map of the world will look completely different. Continents will have moved thousands of kilometres, mountain ranges will have risen and eroded away, new trenches will have formed, and old ones will have vanished. This is the context in which we must understand earthquakes. They are not isolated events, but part of an ongoing transformation of the planet's surface. Each earthquake is a small adjustment in a much larger process, a momentary release of stress in a system that is constantly accumulating and redistributing strain. The largest earthquakes, the ones that shift coastlines and reshape seafloors, are simply the most dramatic expressions of this process, the moments when the planet's breathing becomes loud enough for us to hear. Consider the coastline of Chile again, that long, narrow country pressed between the Pacific Ocean and the Andes. Its entire history, its entire geography, is shaped by the subduction of the Nazca Plate beneath South America. The trench offshore is where old oceanic crust, formed millions of years ago at a mid-ocean ridge far to the west, returns to the mantle. As it descends, it carries with it water trapped in its minerals, water that was absorbed when the crust was young and near the surface. Deep below the Andes, that water is released as the crust heats up and melts, and the water lowers the melting point of the surrounding rock, creating magma that rises through the overlying plate to feed volcanoes. The volcanic peaks that dot the Andes, some active, some dormant, some long extinct, are all products of this process, monuments to the water that rode the descending plate into the depths. The earthquakes along the Chilean coast are part of the same system. The locked boundary prevents smooth subduction, so stress accumulates until the lock breaks and the plates lurch forward. The magma rising to feed volcanoes is generated by the same descending plate. The uplift of the Andes is driven by the collision. It's all connected, all part of the same grand process of one plate consuming another, of ocean crust returning to the mantle after a journey of millions of years. Alaska tells a similar story. The volcanoes of the Aleutian Islands, the earthquakes along the coast, the uplift of the mountains, all of these are connected to the subduction of the Pacific Plate beneath North America. The same is true in Sumatra, where the volcanic peaks of the island are fed by magma generated as the Indian-Australian Plate descends beneath the Sunda Plate. And in Japan, where the volcanic mountains of the island chain are supplied by the melting of the Pacific Plate as it sinks into the mantle. Everywhere we look along the Ring of Fire, we see the same pattern. Trenches, earthquakes, volcanoes, mountain building, all driven by the descent of oceanic crust into the depths. This is not a story of violence, but of transformation. The crust that forms at mid-ocean ridges is young, hot, and relatively light. As it moves away from the ridge, it cools and becomes denser, heavier. Eventually it becomes dense enough to sink back into the mantle at a subduction zone, completing the cycle. The journey from ridge to trench can take 100 million years or more. During that time, the crust may accumulate layers of sediment, may be dotted with volcanic islands, may host entire ecosystems on the seafloor. All of that is carried down into the trench, scraped off the descending plate, or dragged down into the heat below. Some of the sediment is scraped off and piled up along the edge of the upper plate, forming what geologists call an accretionary wedge, a chaotic mass of folded, compressed rock that grows over time as more material is added. Some sediment is carried all the way down into the mantle, where it melts and contributes to the magma that feeds volcanoes. And some of the descending plate itself melts, contributing elements that eventually make their way back to the surface through volcanic eruptions. It's a grand cycle of creation and destruction, of material moving from the surface to the depths and back again, over and over, for billions of years. The earthquakes are just one part of this cycle, but they're the part we notice most because they happen on human timescales. A volcanic eruption unfolds over days or weeks. An earthquake unfolds over seconds. Both are expressions of the same deep process, but the earthquake catches us by surprise because it's so sudden, so abrupt. Yet if we could speed up time and watch the crust over millions of years, we would see that earthquakes are just brief pulses in a much smoother, more gradual motion. The steady descent of one plate beneath another, occasionally punctuated by sudden lurches when the friction becomes too great to hold. Return now to the image of Earth from space, that blue and white sphere turning in the darkness. The lights of cities glow faintly along coastlines, tracing the edges of continents and the boundaries of plates. Most of the time, the planet seems perfectly still. Days pass, seasons change, generations come and go, and the ground feels solid and reliable beneath our feet. But deep below, the slow motion continues, plates drift, boundaries lock and bend, strain accumulates in the silence, and then, every few decades or centuries, the planet takes a breath. A boundary slips, a coastline shifts, the shape of the land changes in an instant, releasing the tension that has been building for so long. These are Earth's largest earthquakes, not disasters, not punishments, but adjustments, exhalations, the natural consequence of living on a planet that moves. We've travelled tonight to Chile, to Alaska, to Sumatra, to Japan, different shores, different cultures, different landscapes, but all touched by the same deep process. All places where the crust has bent and released, where the planet has breathed deeply and then settled back into its slow, steady rhythm. The earthquakes themselves last only minutes, but they are part of a cycle that spans centuries. They are brief moments in a much longer story, punctuation marks in a narrative that has been unfolding for billions of years. Breathe in slowly now, and imagine the Pacific plate sliding beneath Japan, millimetre by millimetre. Breathe out, and imagine the Nazca plate diving beneath South America century after century. Breathe in, and imagine the Indian-Australian plate pushing northeast beneath Sumatra. Breathe out, and imagine the slow rise of the Andes, the Himalayas, the Alps, mountains built over millions of years by the collision of plates, lifted grain by grain, shaped by the same forces that occasionally shake the ground. The planet breathes slowly. Its inhales and exhales are measured not in seconds, but in decades, in centuries, in millennia. And we, living our brief lives on its surface, can learn to breathe with it, to understand its rhythms, to respect its power, to find comfort in the knowledge that even the largest earthquakes are part of a process that is ancient, natural and ongoing. Picture the coastline of Chile at dawn, fog lifting from the water, the Andes catching the first light. Picture the fjords of Alaska, still and silent under the winter stars. Picture the coral reefs of Sumatra, glowing in the clear tropical water. Picture the mountains of Japan, covered in cherry blossoms in spring, snow in winter, forests in every season. These are places shaped by the breathing of the planet, landscapes that exist because the ground moves, because plates collide and dive, because the crust bends and releases. And tonight, as you lie here and let your own breathing slow, you can rest in the knowledge that the planet continues its work. Somewhere, deep beneath the ocean, a plate is descending into the mantle, melting, releasing water that will rise and feed a volcano. Somewhere, a boundary is locked, bending, storing energy for a release that might come tomorrow or a century from now. Somewhere, a mountain is rising, a millimetre each year, patient and unstoppable. Somewhere, a trench is deepening, collecting sediment washed down from the land, burying the history of the surface. Think of the rivers that carry sediment from the mountains to the sea, grain by grain, over thousands of years. Each particle of sand or silt was once part of a mountain peak, worn away by wind and rain, carried downhill by streams and rivers, deposited finally on the floor of the ocean. There it settles into layers, compacting over time, turning slowly into rock, and eventually those layers may be carried down into a trench by a descending plate, scraped off to form new land, or dragged down into the mantle to melt and become part of the magma that will one day erupt from a volcano and begin the cycle again. This is the work of the planet. Constant transformation, constant motion, constant exchange of material between the surface and the depths. The earthquakes are just moments when that transformation becomes sudden and visible, when we're reminded that the solid ground beneath us is actually part of a fluid system, moving and changing on timescales we struggle to comprehend. Picture now the deep ocean trenches, those dark chasms where the seafloor descends into darkness. No sunlight reaches the bottom of the deepest trenches. The pressure is immense, enough to crush most creatures and most human-made vessels. Yet even there, life exists. Strange, adapted organisms that thrive in conditions we would find unbearable, and even there, the planet is moving. The walls of the trench shift slightly with each earthquake, sediment cascades down the slopes, and far below, kilometres beneath the seafloor, one plate continues its slow descent into the mantle, carrying with it everything that rests on its surface. Think of the history contained in that descending plate, rock that formed at a mid-ocean ridge 100 million years ago. Layers of sediment deposited over tens of millions of years, each layer a snapshot of ocean conditions at the time it was laid down. Fossils of ancient marine organisms, their shells settling to the seafloor and being compressed into limestone. Volcanic ash from eruptions long forgotten. All of this is being carried into the depths, heated, compressed, transformed. Some of it will melt, some will be incorporated into new rock, and some, perhaps, will eventually make its way back to the surface through volcanic eruptions, completing a journey that spans hundreds of millions of years. The waves continue to wash the shorelines, carrying their rhythm from the open ocean to the sand and rock. The mountains continue to catch the first light of morning and the last light of evening, standing as they have for millions of years, as they will for millions more. The trenches rest in darkness, deep and cold and silent, marking the places where the surface of the planet returns to the interior, where the cycle begins again. Earth is not still. It never has been. But its motion is so slow, so patient, that we can live our entire lives without feeling more than a faint tremble now and then. We can build homes, plant gardens, raise children, watch the seasons turn, all on a surface that is drifting, bending, adjusting beneath us. And when the planet does take one of its deep, shuddering breaths, when a boundary slips and a coastline shifts, we can understand it not as an attack, but as a reminder. We live on a planet that is alive in its own way, that has its own rhythms, its own needs, its own long, slow story. So let your breathing match that rhythm now. Slow inhales, slow exhales, imagining the patient movement of rock beneath the ocean, the gradual rise of mountains, the quiet accumulation of strain in the darkness. The planet is breathing, the plates are moving, the continents are drifting, and you, lying here in the safety of this moment, can let go, can trust that the ground will hold you, can fall asleep knowing that Earth's adjustments, however dramatic they may seem, are simply part of the way the world works, part of the way it has always worked, part of the way it will always work, for as long as there is a planet turning in the darkness of space. The stars wheel overhead, distant and constant, while beneath you the planet turns, carrying you with it through the night. The same forces that built the mountains and carved the trenches are at work now, this very moment, though they move too slowly for you to feel. The same process that caused the great earthquakes of the past is preparing, somewhere, for the great earthquakes of the future. But tonight, in this moment, all is still. The planet holds you gently as you drift towards sleep, and in your dreams, perhaps, you'll see it as it truly is. Not a static ball of rock, but a living, breathing world, forever changing, forever adjusting, forever turning in the ancient dark. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy. Lie back now and let your body settle. Close your eyes if you haven't already, and imagine with me a warm, humid night settling over a southern swamp. The air is thick and soft against your skin, carrying the faint scent of mud and green things growing. Crickets are calling in waves, their rhythm rising and falling like gentle breathing. Somewhere in the distance a frog offers a low resonant call, then another answers. The reeds at the water's edge rustle with the smallest breeze, a whisper of movement in the darkness. Mist is beginning to curl off the surface of the water, thin threads of vapour rising into the cooler air above. Moonlight catches the still surface in long silver stripes, breaking and reforming as the water barely moves. Everything here is slow, everything here is patient. And there, along the muddy bank where water meets land, a single alligator lies almost perfectly still. Half of its body rests on the soft mud, the other half submerged in the dark water. Only its eyes break the surface, positioned just above the waterline, catching the faint light like two ancient stones. This creature will be our guide tonight, not with movement or sound, but simply by existing as it has existed, as its ancestors have existed, for an almost unimaginable span of time. This slow, silent animal resting in the shallows is part of a lineage that watched the age of dinosaurs come to an end. It survived when most of the giant reptiles vanished from the earth. It endured ice ages and heat waves, the shifting of continents, and the rising and falling of seas. And here it remains, unchanged in all the ways that truly matter, a living connection to epochs so distant they feel like dreams. Let yourself drift closer in your mind's eye, moving through the warm night air until you can see this alligator in greater detail. Notice the armoured scales covering its body, each one a small shield of bone covered in thick skin, overlapping like the work of an ancient craftsman. The tail extends behind, broad and muscular, a powerful paddle capable of sudden explosive force but now lying utterly relaxed. The snout is wide and rounded, studded with sensors that can detect the smallest ripple, the faintest pressure change in the water. And those eyes, those remarkable eyes, sit on top of the head in perfect placement, allowing the animal to see while the rest of its body remains hidden below the surface. The nostrils, too, are positioned at the very tip of the snout, meaning this creature can float almost entirely underwater and still breathe, still watch, still wait. Every part of this body is built for patience, every feature serves efficiency. The thick skin acts as living armour, protecting against threats but also holding in moisture during dry times. The heart beats slowly, conserving energy, sometimes pausing for long seconds between beats when the animal dives. The muscles are dense and powerful, but spend most of their existence in complete relaxation, coiled, potential that may not be needed for hours or even days. This alligator can wait in one place, barely moving, for longer than most animals could imagine remaining still. It can lower its metabolism, slow its breathing, and enter a state of such profound rest that it seems almost part of the landscape itself. Another log, another dark shape in the water, nothing worth noticing. Watch as it floats now, letting air fill its lungs just enough to maintain neutral buoyancy. It sinks a fraction of an inch, then rises again with the next slow breath, a rhythm as gentle as sleep itself. The water laps softly against its scales. A small fish swims past unaware, and the alligator makes no move. Not yet. Not unless necessary. This is the secret, you see, the ancient wisdom encoded in scale and bone and slow-beating heart. Use as little energy as possible. Move only when movement serves you. Wait, and let the world come to you. This strategy, this patient approach to existence, is what allowed the ancestors of this alligator to outlast creatures far larger, far more active, far more spectacular in their glory. While other animals raced and fought and burned through energy in the constant drama of survival, these low-slung hunters perfected the art of doing almost nothing, almost perfectly. Now let us glide backward through time together, moving in our imagination away from this present moment, this modern swamp with its distant highway sounds and airplane lights crossing the stars. We'll keep this same location, this same wet country, but we'll peel away the layers of human presence. The roads fade, the farms disappear, the towns and cities dissolve like mist. The trees shift and change, the cypresses and tupelos giving way to different species, then different forests entirely, then plants no human has ever seen alive. We're going back through thousands of years, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, and still further until we reach a time millions of years distant. The swamp remains. Different in detail but the same in essence. A warm, wet place where water and land blur together, where plants grow thick and tall, where the air hangs heavy with moisture. And here, in these prehistoric wetlands, we find the early cousins of our modern alligator. They are smaller than some of their descendants will be, but the basic design is already there. Low bodies, armoured skin, powerful tails, eyes and nostrils positioned for surface breathing. They lie along riverbanks exactly as our alligator lies now. They slide into murky water without a ripple. They wait beside fallen logs and overhanging branches for fish to swim past, for small reptiles to come down to drink, for anything careless enough to venture within range of those devastating jaws. All around them, giants walk the earth. Massive dinosaurs thunder through forests. Long-necked sauropods browse the highest branches. Swift predators pursue their prey across open ground. The world of the dinosaurs is dramatic, dynamic, filled with creatures of enormous size and spectacular form. But down here in the water, our ancestors simply wait. They don't compete directly with the giants. They occupy a different space, hunt different prey, follow different rules. While the dinosaurs above need constant food to fuel their massive bodies and maintain their warm-blooded metabolisms, these low-slung water dwellers can eat a large meal and then fast for weeks. They can slow themselves down. They can wait out difficult times by simply stopping, resting, barely living until conditions improve. The pattern repeats day after day, year after year, millennium after millennium. Lie in wait along the riverbank, ambush fish and small animals, slide silently into water when threatened, bask in warm sun when it's available, dig into mud during dry seasons, return when the rains come. This sit-and-wait lifestyle works so well, is so perfectly suited to the environment of warm wetlands, that nature simply keeps it, era after era, with only minor adjustments. The basic body plan proves to be robust, reliable, almost ideal for the niche it fills. Time passes in long, slow waves. Millions of years flow by like water itself, And then, one distant day, something changes. High above the Earth, tumbling through the cold dark of space, a mountain of rock and metal falls toward our planet. It has been falling for a very long time, crossing distances that seem infinite, and now its journey ends. The asteroid strikes the Earth with a force beyond imagination. If we were there, if we could see it from a great distance, we might notice a flash on the horizon, bright as a second sun. Then waves begin crossing the prehistoric seas, massive surges of water racing outward from the impact site. Dust and debris rise into the sky, enormous clouds of pulverized rock that begin to spread, carried by winds dimming the light. But we're telling this as a story from long ago, something that has already happened and passed. There's no need for fear or alarm in the retelling. This is simply what occurred, a moment in the Earth's long history, and we're here now to understand how life responded, how some creatures endured while others could not. The days after the impact grow dark. Dust fills the upper atmosphere, blocking sunlight, causing temperatures to drop. Plants that depend on photosynthesis begin to struggle. When the plants suffer, the herbivores that eat them suffer too, and when the herbivores decline, the predators that hunt them face starvation. For the large dinosaurs, especially those living on land, this becomes an impossible problem. Their massive bodies require constant feeding. They need warmth from the sun or from their own metabolism. When both food and warmth become scarce, when weeks turn to months of diminished sunlight and failing plant life, their great size becomes a liability. They cannot afford to wait. They cannot slow down enough to survive on scraps, one by one. The giants fall. But down in the water, in the rivers and swamps and coastal marshes, a different story unfolds. Here, our alligators' ancestors do what they have always done best. They slow down. Their bodies, built for efficiency, drop into lower and lower states of activity. Their hearts beat slower. Their breathing becomes shallow. They sink into the mud, into sheltered pools, into any protected space they can find. When food is scarce, they simply stop eating. Days pass. Weeks pass. Their metabolism drops so low that they need almost nothing to keep living, just a bare trickle of energy to maintain the most essential functions, and they can eat almost anything. When fish become scarce, they'll take carrion, the bodies of animals that didn't survive floating in the water or washed up on shores. They'll eat each other if absolutely necessary, the smaller and weaker falling to the larger and stronger, a grim but effective way of concentrating scarce resources. They'll consume rotting vegetation, insects, anything that provides even a small amount of nutrition. There is no pride in this, no nobility, just the bare mathematics of survival. Take in enough energy to persist and wait for the crisis to pass, and it does pass. Eventually the dust settles. Sunlight begins to filter through again. Plants recover, slowly at first, then with increasing vigour. The rivers and swamps fed by rain and runoff maintain their cycles. Life returns to the wetlands, and with it, the food chains rebuild. Our patient hunters emerge from their long wait, thin perhaps, depleted certainly, but alive, still here, still fundamentally unchanged. The world above has transformed. The age of giant dinosaurs is over. New creatures will evolve to fill the empty spaces. Eventually mammals will rise to prominence. Birds will diversify into thousands of forms. The whole character of life on land will shift dramatically. But down in the swamps, the same ancient pattern continues. Alligators and crocodiles and their close relatives persist in their wetland niches, still hunting the same way, still waiting with the same patience, still built along the same basic lines that served them so well for so long. Time accelerates now in our imagining, flowing faster as we watch the long ages pass. Continents drift across the face of the earth like slow-moving ships on an ocean of molten rock. What was once connected breaks apart. What was once separate collides and fuses. Mountains rise where tectonic plates crumple together. Seas flood low areas and then retreat again as ice ages lock up vast quantities of water in polar caps. Climates warm and cool in great cycles, driven by the Earth's tilt and orbit, by volcanic activity, by the changing configuration of land and sea. Through all of this, wetlands keep reappearing. They may shift location. A swamp in what is now North America may drain as the land rises, while new swamps form in what will become South America or Asia. Rivers change course, lakes appear and disappear. but the basic habitat remains available somewhere, always, because water flows downhill and collects in low places, because rain falls and creates marshes, because coastlines generate estuaries and deltas where fresh water meets salt. And wherever these wetlands appear, alligators and their relatives find them. They move with the water, following river systems, swimming along coastlines, spreading into new suitable habitat when climate permits. When ice ages advance and temperatures drop, they retreat toward the equator, toward regions that stay warm enough for their cold-blooded bodies to function. When the ice retreats and warmth returns, they spread again, moving back into higher latitudes, recolonizing rivers and swamps that have been frozen for thousands of years. Their strategy never changes. Stay close to water, bask when it's warm, shelter when it's cold, waste as little energy as possible. Imagine it like a slow, looping dance, movement without hurry, expansion and contraction, in rhythm with the Earth's climate cycles. In your mind's eye, picture an alligator floating in a warm river, sunlight on its back. The seasons turn, the years pass, and it's a different alligator now, same species but generations later, basking on the same riverbank. More time passes, the river shifts course slightly, and another alligator digs a burrow in the mud during a dry season, a simple hole where it will wait out the drought, breathing slowly, hardly moving, until the rains return. Still more time, and we see alligators floating under mats of aquatic plants concealed in green shadows waiting for prey. Over and over, the same small repeatable behaviours, sunning on banks, drifting in shallows, sliding into deeper water, digging simple burrows, floating, waiting, resting. Each behaviour is performed with minimal effort. Each adaptation is just enough and no more than necessary. The body plan remains remarkably stable because it works, because it needs no improvement, because evolution is not a march toward complexity, but a process of fitting organisms to their environments. And if a fit is good enough, if it allows survival and reproduction generation after generation, why change it? Let us return now to our modern alligator, still floating in the warm southern swamp, and compare it with those ancient relatives we visited in the distant past. The same basic armour covers the body, thick, ossified scales called scutes that protect the back and sides. The same paddle-like tail extends behind, capable of propelling the animal through water with powerful sweeps or delivering devastating blows to prey and rivals. The same broad snout houses ranks of conical teeth designed not for chewing but for gripping and holding. The same positioning of eyes and nostrils allows surface breathing and surveillance, while the body remains submerged. This is what scientists call a conserved design, a body plan that evolution has, maintained with only minor modifications over enormous spans of time. It's not that these animals haven't evolved at all. Their DNA has changed, new species have emerged, some lineages have gone extinct, but the fundamental architecture, the basic blueprint, remains recognizable across tens of millions of years because it represents a solution that works, and works well, and keeps working in the environments where these animals live. Consider the jaws. They can close with enormous force, enough to crush bone, powered by massive muscles that make up a significant portion of the animal's skull. Tests have measured bite forces of thousands of pounds per square inch, among the strongest of any living animal, and yet these jaws spend most of their time doing nothing. They remain still, relaxed, slightly open perhaps to help regulate temperature, but not clamping, not crushing. The power is there, coiled and ready, but it's used sparingly, deployed only when necessary. A perfect example of the alligator's overall strategy: possess overwhelming capability but exercise patient restraint. Or think about the muscles that drive the tail. They can contract with explosive force, propelling the animal forward in a sudden lunge or allowing it to leap partially out of the water. But most of the time, they're almost completely relaxed. The alligator floats, drifts, lets currents carry it, barely twitching its tail to make small adjustments in position. It can explode into motion, but it chooses not to, saving that capability for the moments when action truly matters. Even the respiratory and circulatory systems show this pattern. The lungs can hold enough air to keep the animal submerged for extended periods, and the heart can slow dramatically underwater, reducing oxygen consumption to minimal levels. Blood flow is redirected away from less essential organs, concentrated where it's needed most. The whole body becomes a study in efficiency, in doing more with less, in maintaining function while expending minimal energy. This is how you survive for tens of millions of years. Not through constant innovation, not through arms races with predators or prey, but through having a simple, robust strategy that keeps working. Find a niche, fill it well, and don't waste energy on anything that doesn't serve survival and reproduction. Be the rock in the stream, the constant presence while everything else changes around you. The night deepens in our imagined swamp, and it's time to follow our alligator through its evening routine. The moon has climbed higher now, and its light penetrates the mist in soft, diffuse beams. The alligator begins to move, almost imperceptibly at first. A slight shift in the angle of its body, a gentle sweep of the tail. It drifts away from the bank, moving into slightly deeper water, floating low with eyes and nostrils still breaking the surface. It moves along the bank without hurry, covering perhaps a dozen yards in as many minutes. To any observer, it might appear to be drifting randomly, pushed by gentle currents, but there's purpose here. The alligator is checking its territory, moving through familiar hunting grounds, using senses we can barely imagine. It can feel vibrations through the water, the tiniest ripples created by moving fish or wading birds. Specialized sensors in its scales detect pressure changes. Its eyes, adapted for low light, pick up movement even in near-complete darkness. And its sense of smell, both in air and in water, tells it what creatures are near, what might be wounded or weak. Small fish are present. We can imagine them if we look carefully. Flickers of silver in the moonlight, schools moving together through the shallows. Birds too, night herons perhaps, stalking through the reeds on long legs, hunting the same fish the alligator hunts but from above. Mammals visit the water's edge, raccoons washing food, opossums drinking, possibly a deer stepping carefully down the bank. Most of them never notice the alligator. It's too still, too patient, too perfectly camouflaged as just another dark shape in a dark swamp. Then, a slight change. The alligator stops drifting. Its body becomes absolutely motionless, even its eyes seeming to fix on a single point. Something has moved within range. We won't specify exactly what, but something living, something unwary. The alligator waits. Seconds pass, more seconds. The prey moves slightly closer, perhaps entering the water, perhaps just lingering at the edge, and then, in a moment so brief it's almost impossible to follow, the alligator moves. There's a sudden explosion of motion, tail thrashing, jaws opening, the whole body surging forward. Water erupts in a white splash. A swirl forms where still surface existed just a heartbeat before, and then, almost as quickly as it began, the violence stops. The water settles. Ripples spread outward in expanding circles. The alligator is there again, floating low, something now held firmly in its jaws. It does not thrash or fight. It simply holds, letting the grip of those powerful jaws do their work, waiting with the same patience it brought to the hunt. After a moment, it tilts its head back and swallows, the meal going down with a few jerks of the neck, and just like that, it's done. One strike, one meal, enough to sustain the animal for days or even a week, depending on the size of the prey. This is energy efficiency at its finest. Move rarely, but when you move, make it count. Don't chase, don't pursue. Let the prey come to you, then execute with overwhelming force and precision. The alligator sinks slightly now, adjusting the air in its lungs, allowing itself to become less buoyant. It descends until only the very top of its head remains above water, eyes like two small islands, nostrils like tiny periscopes. It might stay this way for the rest of the night, digesting slowly, watching the swamp, waiting to see if another opportunity presents itself. Or it might sink further, dropping below the surface entirely, hovering in the dark water like a slow-moving log suspended between surface and bottom. Alligators can hold their breath for hours when resting, their metabolism so slow that oxygen needs are minimal. Everything about this routine speaks of efficiency, of energy thrift, of not wasting motion or effort on anything that doesn't serve survival. And this routine, carried out night after night, season after season, year after year, is essentially the same routine its ancestors performed in prehistoric swamps millions of years ago. The details differ, different prey species, slightly different water chemistry, modern pollutants that weren't present before, but the pattern remains unchanged. Wait, watch, strike when the moment is right, then return to waiting. Now let us gently introduce a new element to our swamp scene. In the distance we can hear the faint sound of a boat motor, distant but approaching. Lights appear, sweeping across the water, a small fishing boat perhaps, or wildlife observers out to see the nocturnal animals. The alligator notes this but doesn't flee. Humans have become a familiar presence in many of these wetlands, and alligators have learned over generations how to coexist with them. There was a time, not so long ago in the scale we've been considering, when humans hunted alligators heavily. Their skins were valuable, their meat considered a delicacy by some, and they were killed in enormous numbers. Populations crashed. In some areas, alligators nearly disappeared entirely. But then humans did something that many species would find surprising. They changed course. Laws were passed protecting alligators. Wetlands were designated as conservation areas. Education programs taught people about the importance of these animals in their ecosystems, about how alligators create and maintain habitat that benefits dozens of other species, about how their presence indicates a healthy wetland. And so, in many places, alligators recovered. Their populations grew back towards sustainable levels. They reclaimed rivers and swamps they'd been driven from. They became, in an odd way, symbols of successful conservation, proof that humans could recognize a mistake and work to correct it. Of course, this relationship isn't simple. There are still conflicts, still occasional dangerous encounters, still debates about how to manage human development near alligator habitat. But in general, where wetlands are preserved, where water quality is maintained, where hunting is carefully regulated, alligators continue their ancient patterns almost unchanged. The boat passes, its lights sweeping across the water one more time, and then it's gone. The sound of its motor fading into the distance. The swamp settles back into its nighttime rhythms. Our alligator hasn't moved. It remains low in the water, patient as stone, unbothered by the brief intrusion. This too is part of its resilience, the ability to tolerate change, to coexist with new elements in the environment as long as the fundamental requirements are met. Water, warmth, food, places to bask and shelter. In this way, alligators have become survivors not just of natural climate swings and asteroid impacts, but also of the modern age with its cities and farms and highways. They've adapted without changing, persisted without transforming, simply by being what they've always been. Patient, efficient, robust enough to handle disturbance as long as their core habitat remains intact. As we near the end of our journey, imagine the perspective slowly pulling back. We rise above the water, looking down at the alligator resting almost fully submerged now, only its eyes and nostrils visible above the surface. The eastern sky is just beginning to lighten, not with full dawn yet, but with that first subtle shift from black to deep blue that tells of sunrise approaching. The mist over the water grows slightly thicker as the air cools in these last hours before morning. The sounds of the swamp continue unchanged. Crickets, frogs, the soft rustle of reeds, water lapping gently at muddy banks. From this height we can see the whole swamp spread out below, a patchwork of water and land, of trees and open channels, of places where the boundary between solid and liquid blurs into something in between. And we can imagine, if we look with different eyes, all the layers of time beneath this moment, the dinosaur age swamps that once covered this same region, the cold periods when ice advanced and alligators retreated south, the warm intervals when they returned, the asteroid winter they endured, the millions upon millions of years of patient hunting, of lying in wait, of surviving through sheer efficiency and robust design. This creature floating below us, so still it seems almost part of the water itself, is a living link to all those vanished times. Not a relic or a leftover, but a successful design that continues to work, continues to fill its ecological role, continues to do what it has always done. While the world changed around it, while continents drifted and mountains rose, while ice ages came and went, while humans appeared and built civilizations, the alligator simply kept being an alligator, kept waiting, kept watching, kept surviving with minimal waste and maximum patience. There is something profound in this, something worth contemplating as we allow ourselves to drift towards sleep. In a world that often celebrates speed and constant activity, constant innovation and change, here is a creature that succeeds through slowness. through conservation of energy, through knowing when to move and when to be absolutely still, through the wisdom of waiting. Let yourself mirror that now if you can. Settle deeper into whatever supports you. Allow your breathing to slow, to find its own rhythm like the gentle rise and fall of the alligator in the water. Feel your body becoming heavier, more relaxed, energy conserving itself for tomorrow. There's nothing you need to do right now, nothing you need to accomplish. You can simply float, like our ancient hunter floating in the warm swamp water, held up by forces you don't have to think about, breathing without effort, resting without worry. The alligator's eyes are closing now, or perhaps just becoming hooded, the nictitating membrane sliding across to protect them while still allowing some awareness of the surroundings. The great tail lies still. The armoured body barely moves with breathing. In this state of deep rest, the alligator will remain for hours, conserving energy, digesting its meal, waiting for the day to warm enough for basking. It has no anxiety about the future, no regrets about the past. It simply exists in this moment, perfectly suited to its environment, descended from a line of survivors stretching back further than human civilization, further than human existence, further than the age of mammals. Water laps gently at the bank, the reeds sway with the smallest breeze. Somewhere in the distance a night heron calls once, then falls silent. The mist continues its slow drift across the surface, curling and uncurling in patterns that never quite repeat. Everything here is slow, everything here is patient. And if you're still awake, still listening, know that this ancient patient hunter will continue its quiet watch while you drift away. It will be here when morning comes, still floating, still waiting, still carrying forward a pattern of existence that has outlasted almost everything else that ever lived. The swamp will be here tomorrow night, and the night after, and for thousands of nights to come. The alligator, or its children, or its children's children, will lie in these same waters, watching with those same ancient eyes, breathing at the surface with those perfectly positioned nostrils, surviving through patience and efficiency and the simple wisdom of doing what works, what has always worked, what will continue to work as long as there is water and warmth and time. Let that image carry you now. The still water, the patient hunter, the soft sounds of the swamp at night, the weight of all those years, all that survival, all that quiet endurance. You're floating too now, held up by your own rest, your own stillness. Nothing to do but breathe and settle and allow sleep to come in its own time, like everything in the swamp, without hurry, without force, gentle and inevitable as the turning of the earth toward dawn. The alligator floats, you float. The swamp breathes softly around you both, and somewhere in the darkness, in the warm, humid night, the ancient pattern continues, unchanged and unchanging, patient as stone, patient as water, patient as the slow turning of millions of years. The next story is about to begin. Please relax and enjoy.